and they probably, if they could vote, they'd probably vote for Joe Biden. Most Canadians probably would.
Yeah,
you
tragically, I think
that?
you're right. I think you're right. I think Trump's going to win. I think he'll win by a wide margin. I was going to say landslide. I don't know if it would be that wide, but I do believe that you're right, that a lot of his support is underrated. Look at the rallies that the vice presidential candidate, whose name I can't remember, on Biden's ticket. She went to a rally and 10 people showed. What, sorry?
Kamala Harris.
Yes, Kamala Harris had a rally. 10 people showed up. Half of them probably were her staff. So she was out near an advanced polling station screaming at people about why they shouldn't vote for Trump. I mean, this is what the vice president, a candidate for the vice president of the United States is reduced to on the Democratic ticket. That tells you a lot, and they can't hide that.
Well,
can't.
It should tell you a lot, Nick.
It does.
Except, and here's the wild card. The wild card is COVID-19. In other words, we don't know, ultimately at this stage, we don't know what the effect is going to be of the current health situation and the panic and the angst and the fear that people have of this. So we know that there's been advance voting and mail-in voting in record numbers. So the question is, what impact has the pandemic had on Democratic rallies when the Democratic candidates are saying, we're not going to focus so much on events as much as we're going to focus on making sure that people get out and vote. And, of course, that means in many cases mail-in ballots because people aren't actually going to the polls themselves physically. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. And I think that area probably is where you're going to see the greatest number of legal challenges once the polls close and the results start to come in. And if there's potential for turmoil and chaos, I think that's where it exists. That's where it would emanate from, would be from the mail-in ballots and the advanced polling.
You could be right, and I will admit that is a huge question mark cast over this whole thing. The question is, who do people think is going to be the best to, whether or not you believe that COVID is a medical pandemic or a social one, because I think it's one or the other, and I tend to think it's social. Who do they trust to guide them through this, to get them? Because Trump's out there saying, get your kids back in school. And, this isn't nearly as bad. He's the one out there saying that, we'll get through this, everything's going to be fine, providing at least some kind of leadership. What's Joe Biden saying? First of all, that's a very good question because nobody's really sure. He wants to do all kinds of things, like a mask mandatory law. Well, if you look around the world, there are now protests in Europe and in other places growing in size and number of people protesting the lockdown, protesting wearing mask regulations. They've hit a wall. They just don't want to do this anymore because it's so damaging to their social fabric in their communities. You can't go to your grandmother's funeral because of COVID. Are you kidding? What's you going to do? Die? I don't mean to be callous, but the point is that I think there's a lot of that's out there just underneath the surface. And if Biden keeps ringing the fear bell and Trump keeps ringing the hope bell, people tend to listen to the fear bell first. But after a while, it's like the little boy who cried wolf. Sooner or later, they get tired of hearing the fear bell and they go looking to the guy ringing the hope one.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why I think that Trump is going to win in large numbers.
Well,
how it'll work, I don't know.
My gut is telling me that Trump will win and that he will win handily. My gut is telling me that. My head is not telling me that. My head is much more reticent. I think that one of the factors also that has to be taken into account is the degree of hatred out there, and there's really no other word to use to describe it. The degree of hatred that's out there for Donald Trump on the left. So,
yeah,
when we talk about enthusiasm, it is true that the Democrats have not focused on rallies and big events in this election cycle. But I think it's a mistake to look at the rallies that the Trump campaign has put on versus the non-events. And when I say non-events, I mean even when the Democrats have put events on, they've turned out to be essentially non-events. I think it's probably a mistake to look at those two, the contrast between the two, and say, read too much into that difference between the two of them. There's a lot of not enthusiasm as much as determination on the left to get rid of Donald Trump. And I wouldn't put voter fraud past a lot of people. I don't think that the Democratic Party per se would organize voter fraud, but I think that individual operatives, especially lower down in the Democratic Party, wouldn't be beyond them to play fast and loose with ballots, etc. That wouldn't surprise me at that level. Would it be enough?
There have already been cases of that.
Yeah, would it be enough to affect the outcome of the election? I don't know. But as I said before, if there's going to be turmoil, that's where it's going to happen.
Remember, keep this in mind, that the larger the voter turnout, the harder the vote is going to be to manipulate. It's one thing to stuff ballot boxes or to make ballots disappear or do all kinds of different things in a municipal election or even, a tier higher than that. But when you're talking about 800 million people, no, 800 million, what am I talking about? When, I just read there was a 80% turnout or whatever the number is, how many voters there are, it was like 75 or 80% said they were going to vote in this election. The larger that number is, the harder it is going to be manipulate simply because of the weight of numbers involved. You can only do so much in the time allowed that I think that it works in Trump's favor if there's a huge turnout.
Right.
If you've got a lower turnout but a higher one in democratically controlled states, that might be a different story. But if the whole country goes to the polls, the Democrats are not going to, at any level, are not going to have the ability to make any major impact. They might affect local races, but I don't know that they're going to be able to change the course of the federal one.
Okay, Nick, we have a couple of minutes left here, literally 2 minutes. So let's just talk a little bit about our plans for the future, because we've been sort of teasing people the last few weeks, saying we have some big announcements to make. So
Yep.
The big announcement is that starting next week, Nick will be returning to terrestrial radio. The Nick and Joe Show will be carried live on Wednesday nights on 2 FM stations. We're not going to announce which ones they are just yet, but we're going to have 2 FM stations, and of course for our online audience, we're going to continue to broadcast as we are right now, simultaneously online. So if you're listening to us anywhere in the country, or frankly around the world, you're still going to have the chance to do that and participate in our live chat room. If you are listening to the podcast, that's not going to change either. Just that we want to let people know that we're going to be taking that big step. And as we move forward, our sincere hope is that we're going to continue to bring more and more terrestrial radio stations on board. And increase our listenership, and there it is. Didn't even rehearse that announcement, Nick.
No, you did fine off the cuff, I will admit. And I'm looking forward to getting back behind us, into a studio and back behind the microphone from the point of view of broadcasting. I've always been, I really missed not being on terrestrial radio, so to be back in the saddle again from that perspective is going to be something I'm really looking forward to. And that'll be next Wednesday night. Same time. It'll be on the same time as the podcast, of course. It'll be 8 till 10. And I don't know if we'll have it ready yet next week, but we're going to try to start bringing phone calls on so that people can call in live to the terrestrial radio station and everybody get a chance to hear what they have to say. So we'll have more for you next week on that front.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us again on the Nick and Joe Show. We're going to catch you next week. Don't forget to tell your friends and neighbors about us. And, I think that's pretty much all I have to say, Nick.
All right. With that said, we'll say goodnight. And all I have to say is ubi caritas et amor, Deo sibi est. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace. And may have a fair wind and a following sea.